Ulrich Brueckner. He's a professor of European Studies at Stanford University in Berlin. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us. It's a pleasure. Now, we've been going back and forth on this issue for months now on whether or not Russia is planning to invade Ukraine, or if Putin is trying to just use his military power in securing those security guarantees from the U.S.
Well, it is still unclear what exactly the point is, because Russia claims that this is about security. And if there is a security issue with Russia, it would be the easiest to sit down and formulate conditions under which both sides could go back to normal. Russia claims that Nato is an aggressor. Nato is a defense alliance, and there is certainly no appetite in any NATO member state to attack anyone, and it has never been like this. When it comes to the expansion, there is also no appetite in NATO to include future members like Georgia or Ukraine. So a lot of it sounds like a staged problem, and being aggressive by mobilizing such large numbers of troops and now even announcing that there will be a marine operation happening to encircle Ukraine is certainly an aggression with no clear result to be expected.
So what's your analysis on why exactly Russia is asking for these security guarantees from the U.S. and it's taking what it calls its precautions towards NATO expanding its alliance into Eastern Europe?
In a geopolitical perspective, Russia wants to be respected as a global player. In the times of the Obama administration, it has been diminished to a regional power, according to Obama's description of how he sees Russia, and it wants to go back to the good old times when it was a global force. On the other hand, it is very afraid of things could turn complicated, as recently in Kazakhstan, in which the attractiveness of a Western model, a market economy, and freedom and the development of the civil society that could question the legitimacy of an autocratic system is the biggest fear. So Russia wants to flex muscles, wants to impress its domestic situation by showing how powerful it is and that they have a great army and they can threaten the West and they can divide the West, which in result will turn to the opposite, because the West has never been more united, and America is back in Europe, which is something we couldn't expect when Biden was elected, and he just said it. But now the United States are back in the scene in European security.
They definitely are, and we heard from Biden yesterday saying that he's almost positive that Russia will take action militarily, while the Kremlin, again, have used every chance they can to reiterate their seriousness of not invading Ukraine. It's hard to tell, isn't it, given the history between Russia and Ukraine, whether or not they'll take action militarily?
Well, Russia has never really seen Ukraine as a sovereign state. And they celebrated this week the unification of the two countries 500 years ago, and this is their mindset. They don't respect the sovereignty of their neighboring country, and they mobilize patriotic feelings, which is always the case in autocratic system, that you address emotions. What we see as, is it rational to not dump the billions that have been invested in Nord Stream 2? All these calculations might appear as peanuts if you think in global perspectives and look back to what happened in 500 years ago, and if the biggest drama of the 20th century is considered to be the end of the Soviet Union. So all these different perspectives make it hard to understand what's going on, and that is why diplomacy is so important, and it's a great another step to see this meeting today in Geneva.
All right, the meeting today in Geneva, it is being seen as one of the most important being held in recent time. And as we've mentioned, the ultimate goal here is to, through negotiations, reach an agreement. But these meetings have proved to be unsuccessful. Do you think there is still room for diplomacy?
Of course, there's room for diplomacy, and it's the only way how we can solve the problem. The alternative would be an aggression, and that would lead to an escalation of the situation, that Russia would violate international law, and this aggression would lead to a counterstrike in economic terms, certainly not a war on European soil with Nato being involved. But already the strength of the Ukrainian army will lead to major casualties on the Russian side, which is extremely unpopular in the country. So it's one thing to threaten and to flex muscles and to show how many tanks a country has, but it's another thing to get out of this, and the only way of doing so is diplomacy.
All right, Professor Ulrich Brueckner, thank you so much for joining us here on the NewsHour and sharing that insight with us.